Sorry not being able to be with you. Thank you for your invitation. Now that I can come to the States, this invitation was we got this invitation before me being able to come to the States. And then from where I am, I had other commitments here in Montreal where I'm stuck because, as you know, it's impossible to go back to Europe these days. So this is where I am, and this is where I'm staying. So thank you for your invitation, and let me go straight to some of the main points of our discussion about salvation in Islam, because this is a very important topic and with many and multiple dimensions in the way we have to tackle the issue. So as an introduction, three main points. The first one is when we speak about salvation in Islam and the very meaning of what it means to be with God and to try to connect with the very essence of our religion, and in which we think about being saved and being close to the Creator from within a religious tradition. In fact, we are talking about something which is very important, which is the concept of human being. Very often we go straight to the discussion about salvation, about sometimes paradise and hell, about what is wrong and what is right, about morality, about rules, but we forget to speak about the very essence of this concept of human being, because in all philosophies and in all religions, in Judaism, Christianity and Islam, the monotheistic traditions, but also when it comes to spiritualities and Buddhism and Hinduism, it's quite important to come to the very concept of human being, because this is where we understand how our religious tradition is dealing with this concept of human beings, this conception of human beings, and in which way the human beings are asked to act and to behave in order to get this salvation and to be close to God. So this is the first important point for us. The second thing which is important with the concept of human beings, it's really to be also able to come to what we are trying to achieve. So it's not only about the being, it's about the behavior, because salvation has to do with the way you have to behave in order to be loved by God, which is the highest level in the Islamic tradition, which is forgiven, which is also something which has to do with the reality of the religious tradition, and to be one of this faithful to the religious tradition. So here it's something which has to do with a way of being and with God, and a way of being with your own self. So it's first the concept of human being, which is the first point that we can get in the whole Islamic traditions and Islamic sciences, what we call Islamic sciences in the mainstream classical tradition. And the second thing is, okay, having said this, how do we behave, and in which way we have to deal with our own self, because this is the very starting point of anything which has to do with the spiritual lessons and the spiritual tradition, is the way you are with your own self, the way you behave, and the way you deal with the surrounding world. And the last point, which is important when it comes to talking about salvation, is really something which is important, is in fact, what am I looking for? What is the very essence of this quest? When, the quest for meaning in Islam, as in other religious traditions, is, in fact, the answer is God. There is one God, and this is the answer to the quest for meaning. But while we have this response to the very essential question, there is something which is, so having said that there is one God, which is the centrality of Tawheed, the oneness of God in Islam, what we are talking about here is something which has to do with, okay, having said this, what am I looking for with or through this relationship with the one God, with Allah? And Allah is the Arabic word to say for saying God, and I think that it's also something that we have to repeat in our discussion when it comes to this understanding that we are talking about the same one God in all the monotheistic tradition. And then what am I looking for in this relationship? What do I want to achieve? So through my being, through my behavior, and in this relationship with God, what it is said in my religious tradition, and this is where we as a Muslim have to deal with this concept of salvation. And the second question, which is following the first one, what am I looking for, is what can I hope? What is the very essence? Because salvation, in the perception that there is a relationship with God, that he's expecting something from me, which is exactly what we have with the age of reason in Islam, you become mukallaf. Mukallaf means God is expecting something from you. You have to behave in a certain way to be saved, to be close to him. And there are levels, there are steps that you have to go through and rules that you have to respect. So with this, what can I hope, which is also something which is important. Not only what can I hope as for the relationship I have with myself, but the relationship that I have with God, and then with beyond this life, what is my perception of the hereafter. So we understand that when we come to the concept of salvation in any religious tradition, it's very deep, it's multi-dimensional, and we have really to understand the complexity and to come back to the scriptural sources, and then to understand what is said in the Quran, what is said in the Islamic tradition, and we extract from the scriptural sources a kind of a philosophy with ends, with framework, outlines, and then with a process where we understand that what is expected from us. It's from within a religious tradition, a philosophy of life. And then with its ends, with its requirements and conditions and practices, worship, and also a relationship to your own heart and your own fellow human beings. And then, of course, all this in the light of your relationship with God. And I don't want just to minimize this dimension, because very often, once again, we go straight to some of the rules, forgetting the essence of the whole discussion. And the essence is there is no way to speak about salvation without coming from what is the spiritual teaching from within the religious tradition. It has to do with a spiritual understanding, intellectually, but also from the very essence of the relationship that we have with our heart. In one book, starting now with this first part, what is the Islamic concept of human being? Which is, for me, coming, I have studied the Western philosophy and also being involved in interfaith dialogue. I very much think that it's the missing link in our dialogue. And that we tend to think that we all have the same concept of human being, or the way we look at our soul, our body, and our heart. And in fact, there is something which is quite specific, which is not shared in a so easy way by all the traditions, be it the Christian tradition, the Greek tradition, for example, when it comes to philosophy, the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition. The monotheistic traditions do not have exactly the same understanding of what is a human being and how do we qualify, morally speaking, a human being, or what is the dimensions are what constitute a human being. So let me come to this. In one book called Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, at the beginning of the book, while I was talking about us being Western Muslims, I said that the very beginning for us is really to come to a very deep understanding of this the Islamic concept of human being, because in our dialogue and our mutual understanding, it's quite important to come to this. So there is here something which is very important. Yes, we have in the Islamic tradition elements that constitute a human being. We are talking, and we come to in nafs, for example. Very often we speak about a nafs as the person. It's the concept of who the person, or sometimes the translation of a nafs is the soul, and sometimes the translation of a nafs, which is constituting a human being, is the body, or even sometimes the intellect. In fact, we have to be very precise here, because in our translation of some of the Arabic concepts, we are quite very often not precise, not focused, not clear enough in our understanding. In fact, there is something which is a ruh, which is the soul, the spirit, which is in the body of the human being. And this is, in one of the prophetic tradition, what constitutes, in fact, a human being. So when we speak about nafs, sometimes we translate as a spirit, as a breath, or sometimes we translate it as the human being, the body. And in fact, we have here to be very careful. In fact, what is a human being is this spirit within the body. So the soul within the body. This is a nafs, which is constituted by a body and something which is the divine breath that is within us, and it will become for us our soul. And here there is something which is important. We, as you know, when you have studied the Greek philosophy or Christianity, for example, and we come to this understanding, we may find in all the traditions here, coming from the very old Greek tradition and also in Christianity and Judaism, elements that are exactly the same. We speak about the heart, we speak about the soul, we speak about the body. But what is quite important in our understanding, and this is the starting point of our discussion on salvation, is how do we qualify these elements? And if you come to the Greek tradition, you will see that in the Greek tradition, the soul is perceived as positive and the body as negative. In the Christian tradition, you have also something which is the original sin, which is the fact that you are who you are is connected to the sin from the very beginning. And what you have to do is to try to find a way to save yourself, and this will be through the mediation of Jesus. In the Islamic tradition, there is no original essential qualification, neither of the body nor the soul. The soul is not per se good or the body per se bad. This is not at all morally qualified from the beginning. And this is something that we can find in the work of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali in Ihya Ulumuddin, a very essential book that he wrote on this. And then he was also dealing with, philosophers and this relationship with the Greek philosopher. But he was coming to this discussion about the qualification and the moral qualification of these elements of our being, which is completely different. We use the same words, we do not qualify them the same way. Why it is important here also in our understanding of the human being? Because the starting point is this one. In fact, from the very beginning, the human status is two things that are qualifying human being. Innocence. And this is why we have a prophetic tradition. It's a weak one, but the message that is conveyed through this hadith, which is the prophetic tradition, is quite important, is that the sons and the daughters of the people who are, for example, in a time of war, this was a relationship of, very conflicting relationship that the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, had with, his own people, the tribes of Mecca at the beginning. And the people who are rejecting the very essence of Islam and the one God and the new religion, is that their sons and their daughters are innocent. So he had a dream about them being in paradise. And the people who were his companions were shocked. The sons and the daughters of these people who are trying to kill us are in paradise? Yes, because they are innocent. So it's about, to be a child. This childhood is about innocence till the age of reason, till you become aware that you have responsibilities, till you are accountable, mukallaf. This was the word I used before. And here, this is something that we find also in all the classical tradition. It's not new what I'm talking about, but it's out of all this, and even the work done by the jurists, the fuqaha, you can get a philosophy on the concept, the Islamic concept of human being, is that the very beginning is all about innocence. You are innocent. You are not a sinner by essence. You are innocent. And then there is a second thing which is quite important, and this is coming in the second surah of the Quran, the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, where it's said that there was a relationship between the angels, and this is an image which is very powerful, where they have to bow in front of human beings. Why? And this is what the scholars told us, because he is free. So at the beginning there is innocence and freedom. Freedom as the starting point of anything which is describing the human being. And because there is freedom of innocence, we understand the meaning of dignity. And this is why we have in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ قَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We gave to human beings his or her dignity. And this dignity is understood as coming from this innocence as the original status, and freedom as the first status, the first reality that a conscience, that an intellect is dealing with. And al-karama, it's coming from these two dimensions. Why is it important? Because in fact, my body is not bad or good per se. My soul is not bad or good per se. My heart is not bad or good per se. It's me, with my innocence, my intellect, and my conscience, who have to decide what I'm going to do. So the moral qualification is not coming through the essence, it's coming from through the action, my behavior. So I am innocent at the beginning, I become aware of my responsibility, and this is what I'm going to do with my body, which is going to tell the body, is it the right way to behave? So the body will have, out of my behavior and my conscience, this moral qualification, which is not exactly what you find in the Socratic tradition, for example, or the Greek tradition, for example, even in the Christian tradition. And it's closer to the Jewish tradition on this qualification, even though some of the tradition, what you find, for example, in Maimonides' work, it's more subtle than this and it's more complex as to the moral qualification. But if you speak about salvation, you have to start with this. How do we categorize this moral qualification of human beings, of the elements that are constituting these human beings, and then the human beings, and then what can they hope, or what is their hope, or what are they looking for through their quest of meaning here. So I would say here that this innocence and freedom, this intelligence, and then where we have to decide for ourselves, this is where we get the first ethical qualification. And then, once again, what it is said here is you have the choice. And the very beginning is this. Even though if I believe or not, this is my choice. وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. The one who wants, who is going to believe, and the one who doesn't want, he's going to not to believe. So this is something which has to do with the status of freedom from the very beginning. And then you have to decide the relationship with your own self. And this is why it's all about education. You are innocent. You have to be responsible. It's not a philosophy of guilt. It's not to nurture the sense of guilt. It's to nurture a sense of responsibility. And then this sense of responsibility will tell you now what you have to do first with your own self. And it's all about education. And this is why one of the first way of talking about God in the Quran is first Allah as His name, but also Ar-Rabb. Ar-Rabb, we used to translate this into English or other European language is the Lord. In fact, Ar-Rabb, the roots of the word, it's about tarbiyah. It's connected, it's the same roots. It's about the educator. Is the one who is educating human being to come close to him. And then what we have to do is to go through a process of personal, intimate, self-education. Why am I saying this? Because this is the starting point of salvation. Is that what should I do with my own being? You will be saved if you start to educate yourself. By doing what? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. The one who is going to
to purify his soul, his heart, his self, knowing that in yourself you have a dark side and a more lightened side. You have a side of violence, greediness, selfishness. You have to struggle. This jihad in nafs, which is the jihad within yourself, this is where you will get the right moral qualification. You are responsible to educate yourself to purify it. This is your duty. The self is not good or bad. You have to go through in nafsul ammara, this self that is imposing into you the dark side, violence, selfishness, your aggressivity. So you go from this in nafsul ammara, in the nafsul lawama, when you are facing tensions within your own self, and the highest level is in nafsul mutma'inna, a peaceful state of the heart where you get this peace. At the end of the day, the highest level of this moral qualification is when you are in a state of inner peace. This is where you are reaching the highest moral qualification. This is the good. This is the right. This is to follow the al-ma'ruf, which is known as the good among human beings. But then we also have وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. He's lost. She's lost. The one who is just not following the right path, that is following the dark sides, that is just corrupting his self or herself. Corrupting by doing this, not to respond to the call of God. And God is calling you. Come to the right path. Come to this education of the self, and do not follow your desires, your superficial emotions, the reality of the world. This is a spiritual struggle. This is where you will get the negative moral qualification. So here we are with a being at the beginning who has no moral qualification, but is in a state of dignity because of innocence and freedom. Use your freedom to master your innocence towards responsibility to get purification. This is the spiritual journey. This is where you are going to be saved. This is what you have to do. Now, it's not enough. When you are aware of your own self, you know that you will never be perfect, morally speaking. That it's a very difficult journey, because you know that yes, you are trying your best, but you are always doing things that are not at the highest level. You are never at the highest level of your spirituality. You are struggling. This jihad in nafs, sometimes you win, very often you lose. And this is why you get something which is very important, which is a sense of humility. Humility means that you are not going to succeed alone. This is why we are always saying, and this is to be understood, you cannot get the very essence of what we say when we say, Insha'Allah, if you don't understand what I'm talking about right now. Very often the Orientalists, when they were talking about, Muslims saying, oh, they are fatalists, because they are saying, Insha'Allah, it's always if God willing, this will happen. No, it's not this exactly. It's, I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best with my own self. But at the end of the day, I know how weak I am. I know how difficult it is. And I need Him to succeed. So I do whatever I can, and beyond what I can, Insha'Allah. God willing. If He wants, I will do this. So this is exactly the opposite of a passive attitude. It's a very active, but it's ambition to change myself with humility, understanding that I cannot succeed alone. I need Him to succeed. And this is why we are asking God very often as something which is part of the salvation, part of this humility, which is this connection. I need you. I am in need of your support. And even with my own faith, I have to ask Him, Allahumma la tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaytana. God, not just make us forget the very essence of this faith, lose my faith after having just put me in the right direction. guided me in the right direction. So we're asking him to help us not to forget him. This is the very essence of something which is the moral qualification is not only to follow what is right, is to know the weakness that is in your own self, that you need him to be close to him. You need to remember him to be close to him. You need to remember him in order to ask him to help you not to forget him. So this relationship which is based on something which is accountability, your responsibility nurtured, shaped by your humility as something which is your spiritual journey. Salvation is here, is close to this dimension of commitment to change, humility as to my own power. It's a state of heart. It's a way to deal with the reality here. And this is where we have something which is the third dimension. And this is where I understand why is it that the second name of God in the Islamic tradition is after Allah is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. There is one hadith Qudsi, which is a prophetic tradition with the God's inspiration and prophetic words, saying something, Inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. My mercy always comes before my anger. God is saying this. And one of the most beautiful chapters of the Quran is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. But what does it say? Why is it important to remember this? Because in my journey towards this salvation, I should remember that it's not only that because God is here that I can be saved, but because of his attribute. If he was to judge me only on what I'm doing or who I am, I know how much I'm not perfect. I know what are my weaknesses. I know what sometimes I'm sometimes able to do. And lying to the people I love, cheating, forgetting, neglecting people, not showing solidarity. Salvation is connected to his mercy. He knows me, but he decided, because of his essence, that he will forgive before judging in a harsh way. Inna rahmati, my mercy comes always before my anger. In his judgment, his qualification, his attribute, his other name, who are Rahman, he's the most merciful, is coming as something which I have to understand as being part of my understanding of this journey towards God and to get this sense of being saved. So, humility as to my power and connection to the one as the most merciful, knowing that I'm only going to be saved if he helps me, if he is close to me, if he forgives me. So there is something which is, we know this from the prophetic tradition, that he himself was in a dialogue with God, in a way which he was asking more than 70 times a day. He was asking God to forgive him because of what he knows about himself that nobody can know. Sometimes nobody can see what is in my heart, but I know how much this is sometimes preventing me from being close to him and being saved. So salvation is about not only my behavior, but also his mercy. My ambition, but also my humility. So it's all about this, knowing that at the very beginning, it's a question of responsibility. You have to do the job, and this connection with God. So it's really much based on this relationship with the One and the very deep understanding of Tawheed, which is there is no deity but God, and also my relationship with Him, which is to free myself from my ego, free myself from the dark sides of the dark temptations within my inner life, my heart, and then to come close to Him. And then we understand here also that salvation is about my commitment to change, and it has to do with jihad, which is this effort, this resistance to change what is in my mind, in my heart, but also in my surrounding society, everywhere. من يرى منكم منكرا فيغير بيده. If you see something which is bad, changing with your hand, changing with your words, or criticize it, or changing with your heart. Just don't like it with your heart. This is the lowest level of your iman, which is your faith, your connection to God. This is a prophetic tradition telling us that we should be committed. So it's through our behavior. But the nature of this behavior is based on something which is, I know my responsibility, but I also know my limits. This is where we have the very deep understanding. And the last concept which is coming here in Islam, which is also very important, is about tawbah. Tawbah is to acknowledge the fact that you are not going to be perfect. That to be saved is, I'm trying to pray God. I'm trying to have a dialogue, to communicate, and to tell Him about what is in my heart, or to be always remembering Him. But it's also sometimes to come back to Him and to ask Him to forgive me. This tawbah has also conditions where you come with sincerity, that you don't want to start again what you have been doing. So you talk to Him. And this is why we have in the Quran, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. If my servant, if my worshipper is asking you about me, I'm very close. And I respond to the call of the one who is calling me when she or he is calling me. So I'm close to this call. I respond to the need. I respond to the call if you respond to my call. God is calling us, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, all you who believe, come. So it's a call, and then you call Him to help you to be close to Him. So this dialogue, it's a two-way process. This is why you come with a tawbah. And the tawbah, there are conditions, and something which is very important. When you come with your sincerity, when you don't want to start again, you should be convinced that God is forgiving you. So there is something which is a very positive take on this, which is, yes, you are weak. Yes, you are going to do things that are wrong. But at the end of the day, if you are doing things that are wrong, if you are weak, but you acknowledge this, that you try to come back, and with your deep sincerity, with your heart, you don't want to start again, this is where He's going to forgive. He's going to remove this from you. So there is a very positive message, which is, don't nurture a sense of guilt, but nurture a sense of responsibility married with a sense of humility. This is where you get the very essence of salvation in Islam. So let me say something here which is quite important. The starting point is really about this, a concept of human being. And then what constitutes a human being? And how do we morally qualify? Because salvation is about a framework, an understanding of morality, ethics, applied ethics in your life when you reform yourself, but also when you reform what is in your society and what is around you. Now, to come to the last point, this is where the acknowledgement, as you understand this, the acknowledgement is there is one God and you are going to be saved if you acknowledge this. While there is something which is quite important in the Quran, which is God is going to forgive all the sins. He's able to forgive everything except one, which is to associate, to worship another deity just with Him. So this polytheism is something which is really not accepted in Islam. And when we read the Quran, very often in the understanding of what was perceived as Christianity is, there is a monotheistic tradition, because Christianity is a monotheistic tradition, and understood by Islam as Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. So it's quite clearly in this family of monotheism from the very beginning, but the understanding is the starting point should be acknowledging the fact that there is one God. Now, when you say this, that salvation is coming from this acknowledgement, that this relationship with the one, and then your behavior, and then the way you deal with your innocence, and then with your conscience, and then with your behavior, and then with the people around you, that this is all the rules that you have in the religious tradition. So what about the other people? For example, once a young Muslim came to me and told me, look, what is going to be the fate of Mother Teresa? She's a dedicated Christian. She is serving the poor people, but she's a Christian, and her acknowledgement of one God is not exactly the same as the Tawheed, the Islamic Tawheed, because there is something which has to do with the Trinity. And then there is the acknowledgement of the last prophet, which is part of this relationship with you enter Islam by saying there is one God and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. So what about them? So when you speak about your own, the requirements of your own salvation, there is something which is quite important. What is said in your tradition about the people who are not from your religious community? Because if you think that you are the only to be saved, and then no one is going to be saved because it's only within your religion, there is where you have to take a stand in your daily life. And this is right that some, atheists are agnostics, are saying I have a problem with religious minds because I have the truth, and by definition if truth is on my side, if salvation is on my side, you are lost and you are on the wrong side. And this is why it's quite important here to come to three things, and let me just go straight away to this in my conclusion. Yes, we have in the Quran, Inna ad-dina 'inda Allah al-Islam, that the religion, the very essence of this relationship with God is Islam, is the religion of Islam. And then you have وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَا يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. So if the one who is just looking for another religion which is not Islam, this is not going to be accepted by God, is not going to be accepted from him or her. And this is why it's quite important that we have verses like this. And you have verses like this, and this is why we understand that there are different interpretations. For some today, the literalists, it's quite clear. Anyone who is not a Muslim is going to be lost, not saved. Salvation is not for the one, because they read the Quran and they read that verse in something which is quite clear. Inna ad-dina 'inda Allah al-Islam means the only accepted religion by God is Islam. Islam meaning now our religion. But we don't have only in the very old classical Islamic tradition. This is not the only way. You got Sufyan al-Thawri, for example, and others in the Islamic tradition saying, no, be careful. Islam is the generic religion throughout the history of prophecies and messengers coming to the world. In fact, Judaism was, when Moses was sent, peace be upon him, was the Islam of that day. And Christianity with Jesus was the Islam of that day. And the last revelation with the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the Islam, and the last message called Islam. So in fact, Inna ad-dina 'inda Allah al-Islam, that the only accepted religion is not the name of the religion, is the specific relationship with God. Why are they able to say this? Because in one verse of the Quran, you have something which is quite interesting. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِإِبْرَاهِيمَ أَسْلِمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَإِذْ قَالَ لَهُ, not لِإِبْرَاهِيم, it's in the verse before. وَإِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ أَسْلِمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Meaning by this that God said to Ibrahim, Aslim, be a Muslim, be a servant. And he said, Aslamtu, I am now acknowledging you as my God and the only God. So the word Islam is already there in the relationship between Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and God. Meaning by this that Islam was Islam before the last revelation was called Islam. In fact, in this generic term, we have something which is a specific relation. Meaning by this that it's not something which is an exclusive, narrow understanding what the verse is saying. And we have to talk about this because there are discussions among scholars on this definition. And then when you go for another religion, which is not the Islamic religion, is something which is also perceived as the generic understanding. The concept is broader than only revelation. So having said that, the relationship and the understanding is we have to either, for some, it's very clear that it's only Islam and Muslims of today that are going to be saved, and others are saying no. It's about three things that are important. The first thing is the people who were Christian or were Jews, and they were sincere in their relationship. I don't know what is going to be their destiny. Then they were sincere in something which was the Islam of that time. For today, what is the position that you can have? And some are saying, be careful. They are perceived as people who are denying the last truth and the last revelation, so they cannot be saved. And other scholars are saying, be careful. Mind you, here we are talking about people knowing the religion and rejecting it, and others saying, no, it's all about sincerity. So on this, why am I saying this in that way? We don't have one single answer coming from scholars. And some are judging now because they think that the verses are clear-cut, and others are saying, no, it's broader than that. It's all about sincerity. It's the way you are with God. And as for myself, when I was asked about Mother Teresa, is she in paradise or not? Is she going to paradise? I said, you know, the only answer that is coming from all these texts, it's not of my business. Wallahu a'lam. Allahu a'lam means God knows best. It's not for us to judge the sincerity of the people. They were sincere with their own principles and values. And it's not for us to decide who is going to be elected or not, chosen or not. Because yes, as a Muslim, I believe, and any one of us in a specific religious tradition is believing that his or her tradition is the right one. And we think that this is the way for me to be saved. But what is going to be the future and the destiny of people who are sincere and committed with their own religion, their own principles, and they were trying to do the best as to their behavior, as to the way they were serving humanity? The only right answer, according to my understanding, which is not coming from a personal take, is not new, is what we got in every single word, which is coming from the fuqaha, which are who are the jurists, is saying, Allahu A'lam. God knows best. It's not my duty. And the second part of my answer to this young Muslim was to tell him, you know what? You are asking me about Mother Teresa, about Christian people, and you're asking me where they are. I am telling you, God knows best. But what is my main concern and my main question is that I don't know where I'm going to be myself. I don't know. So why should I ask about the others? God knows best. About myself, I'm just trying, and this is my responsibility, is to do the best. Why is it important also here to add this dimension in our conclusion? Is that the concept of salvation is coming from very old, the idea of salvation, is coming from this concept of human being. The qualification of his or her dimensions and what constitutes her or him. And then this perception that its commitment is accountability and is humility. And at the end, by understanding what it takes for you, what you can hope, which is to be forgiven, to be accepted, to go beyond your status, knowing that with what you are and who you are, it couldn't be easy to be saved because you know all your weaknesses. It's through the mercy of God that this is going to happen. And then His mercy towards humanity should push you to say, as to the destiny of the other, that you don't know, which is part of something which was the qualification from the beginning and the quality from the beginning, which was humility. Don't judge as to the hereafter. You only have to judge the behavior and never the being. And this is something which is quite important. It's not for human beings to judge the beings. Human beings are judging behavior and actions. As to the beings, this is God's specific work and business. It's not of our business. It's not something that we can do as a Muslim. And then last thing which is also important in this is what can we hope? Of course, as all the monotheistic tradition, salvation is connected to something which is important in the Islamic tradition, which is paradise, which is to be welcome in a state of inner peace, in the hereafter, close to God, in this realm of bounty and peace, while the other destiny is hell and all this dimension, all the images that we have in the Quran talking about this. But this is not the highest thing. The highest thing is really what we got coming from the prophetic tradition also, is the highest level of salvation is to be in the vicinity close to God, to be able to see Him, to be able to be close to Him. It's beyond paradise and hell, is God's presence after this life, which is the highest level, which is based on something which is quite important. Love God in this life and your nearness. The fact that you will be close to Him in the hereafter is the translation, the spiritual translation of your love of God in this life. So it's about educating yourself to love Him more, to go beyond paradise, to be close to Him in His love. This is the very essence of the spiritual teaching of salvation in Islam, with, as you have seen, many different interpretations as to some of the ways and some of the qualification and the understanding of the other religious traditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ramadan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you for such a wonderfully rich presentation. We look forward to reading the paper in the edited volume. And now I would like to invite the presenters to come up and ask questions. We have very limited time, so please keep it brief. Please remember to turn on the microphone.
I can't hear you. Maybe you're not speaking.
Yes, there I am.
Yes,
Bruce
I
Lawrence from Duke University. Thank you very much for this exposition on many levels. I appreciate and enjoyed it. But then when you got to Mother Teresa, at the end, of course, we were all, or at least I and many of the people where I was sitting, were on the edge of their seats, wondering what you were going to say to the young Muslim man. And I must say, as I heard your answer come out, I was reminded of M.F. Hussain, Maqbul Fida Hussain, the Indian painter who's painted Mother Teresa. And many people have said, but it doesn't look like Mother Teresa. I mean, it has that kind of Catholic garb, but it's a poor Bengali woman. And when he was asked about this, Maqbul Fida Hussain, he said, yes, that is her signature for heaven.
That's okay. I can't hear you.
Hello,
Ah, yes, that's fine. Yes.
I'm Mohammed Legenhausen from the Imam Khomeini Institute in Qom.
Can you speak louder? I can't hear you really.
Yes.
Yes, that's fine.
I'm Mohammed Legenhausen from the Imam Khomeini Institute in Qom. And you said that with respect to specific people, that we can't decide, it's up to God to decide whether He's going to have mercy on them or not. But what about the paths? Not the people. But can we as Muslims say that the Jewish way of life is a way that leads to God today? Can we say the Christian way of life is a way that can lead to God today?
You're asking me, you know, I think that if we understand when it comes to the monotheistic traditions, that, for example, the very starting point, min ahl al-kitab, they are people of the book. Yes, of course. We may disagree with some of the principles or the practices or even the essence of the religious teachings. For example, it's quite clear that we disagree on Trinity. And we disagree on some, not all, interpretations of what is the chosen people, because we have to be very cautious here not to come with the narrow understanding of this from some specific Jewish traditions or Jewish trends. But I would say here that, yes, it's a way to God, it's the way to be close to God. Now, as to the very essence of the teachings, as to the very essence and the way this is understood, we understand that the cycle of the prophetic traditions coming to the world were to confirm and to rectify what we think was wrong. And this is why Christianity came after Judaism, and Islam is coming at the end. But if it's to confirm is that there is something in the essence, min ahl al-kitab, the people of the book, which is right, which is a way to be close to God. And we have it in the Quran that you will find among the Christians, for example, priests that are full of modesty, and you will find people who are having a dogmatic mindset coming from all the traditions. So I would say yes to this question is something which is important. And add to this even what Ustaz Hamidullah, Professor Hamidullah was saying when he was talking about Buddhism, for example. When I was with Tibetans in India, in Dharamsala, when I met the Dalai Lama, they are not acknowledging the one God, but there is something which is here based on spirituality and ethics. And I would say that this is a way to help the human beings to liberate themselves from their ego. I would say there is the lack of transcendence, but it's the way to come close to this moral expectation. And Hamidullah was saying it may be that at the beginning it was also a revelation which was connected to transcendence, then was lost into history. So I would say no definitive judgment on this, because these are ways also to come close to the one.
We'll have one last question.
Am I too long in my answer? This is what you are.
Thank you. Two more. Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
And be brief. These will be the last two questions, please.
Farid Asak from the University of Johannesburg. You took an interesting turn in your last response when you also referred to the Dalai Lama and the Buddhists. So earlier on in much of your talk you had suggested, along the lines that many other speakers here have suggested, that there is this leeway, certainly in Islam, for the Ahl al-Kitab, and then of course it varies whether the Sabi'in are amongst them or the Zoroastrians are among them, but it is generally accepted that the Christians and the Jews are among them. When we go to the Buddhists, you seem to then say the ethical basis, that there is a moral principle that they adhere to, and therefore this, I think you try to suggest, qualifies them also for salvation. What about if we extend this to beyond the people of the book? Take, for example, the Aymara people in Latin America. Is your principle then reduced to simply people that have an ethical basis to their actions? And if that is the case, are we not really saying that there is really no belief basis for salvation, that it is entirely how people behave and whether they have ethical moorings or not, and all of this then subjected to our very subjective understandings of what ethical moorings are? Thank you very much.
Do you want me to respond now or to wait for the other question?
Is it related?
Up to him.
Go ahead, please voice it.
Assalamu alaikum, Tariq. This is Muqtadar Khan from University of Delaware. In the light of 540, In the light of 548, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if I wanted, I could have created you all as one ummah, but I choose to give you different laws and different minhaj so that you may compete with each other in doing good. Put that with this suggestion that God sent a prophet to every people so that he could speak to them in their own language. And this idea, I mean, you keep saying that, and all of us do that, that Christianity came after Judaism, as if Judaism was terminated and then Christianity came, and then Islam came after Christianity. What happened that they all came at different times. Judaism came, Christianity came, Islam came, and they are still here. So in the light of 548, the idea that there are different prophets for different people who spoke to them in different languages, and the fact that at least there are these three existing concurrent monotheistic traditions which have so much in common, is it possible for us to at least philosophically concede that there are many paths to God endorsed by Islam and Quran? That there are, in the present tense, that there are today many pathways to God which are endorsed by God.
Okay, so let me come to the first from Professor Isaac in what he was saying. There are two things which are quite important. If we speak from within a religious tradition, there are teachings and there are principles. And this is something that is quite important. It's quite clear when you come to the very essence of Islam, that the acknowledgement that there is a creator is something which is important, because salvation here is something which has to do with to be saved by whom, to be elected by whom, to be close to whom, to the one God. So it's quite clear that in anything which is coming to, or which is related to the outside world, so to speak, and other philosophies or spiritualities or religions, it has to do with transcendence, which is the presence of the one God. And then there is a second dimension, which is the one God who is full of mercy, has also is also calling humanity. And he's calling humanity through ethics and morality. There are things to be done and there are things to avoid. Why? Because your humanity, it's coming out of your spiritual education. You come close to the Rabb, which here is, who is the educator, through your education, which is your tarbiyah, your education. So when you have this set of principles and values, it's quite clear that the relationship with others and the way you look at salvation has to do with ethics and transcendence. What is going to be the reality for the people who are not acknowledging any transcendence or do not have a specific ethics? Is it a subjective way that we can accept this? I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say that my respect towards the other is by saying that all the doors of my tradition are open to any subjective take. I would say that this is not going to work for the great majority of the faithful people within a religious tradition. I would prefer not, in order to respect the other, not to say, oh, it's subjective. No, it's to say, I am following rules. I am following a spiritual teaching. I have principles, but these principles are telling me these are for you, and as for the other, suspend your judgment. Allahu A'lam. And if they are here and they are not like you, is to help you to be better. The way you have to be with others is to respect who they are and try to be better as to your behavior. It's a mind which is open in fastabikul khairat, compete in good deeds. So do not, in order to be open-minded, make anything relative or subjective, because there are norms, there are objective norms. And this is why, for example, I understand what is said by Christian priests and theologians and rabbis and Buddhists when they come with something which is a clear understanding of their
religion with principles, but they are not closing the door by saying, we are right, you are wrong, but we are right, and what you are may be right, but what you give me, you help me to be, is better myself. Let your difference be something which is helping us to be better. I would prefer to have this take than to say it's all subjective. And let me say one final word on what Professor Murtada Khan was saying is be careful. I was very precise in saying how do we deal with different religion, and I was speaking about the monotheistic tradition, the way it's perceived from within the tradition, but it's not the end of the story. You refer to some of the verses that are referring to this diversity, but it's deeper than this. It's the understanding that not only there is a chronology, but the will of God was, from the very beginning, for all of us to live in a world of diversity. Why? Because you have the verse, وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسِ بَعْضَهُم بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ, and in other verse is لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيَعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ يُذْكَرُ فِيهَا اسْمُ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا, which is exactly related here to the diversity of religion. If God had not put a set of people against this, competing with others, you would have, monastery and synagogues and mosques being destroyed. So in fact, this diversity is helping us to deal with diversity. Meaning what? That it's not only within history, that you have to acknowledge the fact that there are roots that are to be followed by other people. This is their way to be close to God. In my next book, the next book which is going to be published in 2 months, it's called The Quest for Meaning, Developing a Philosophy of Pluralism. I am using the parable or the image of the mountain. At the top, we have the shared principles and the shared values and the shared religious teachings or philosophical teaching. But we have different routes helping us to go to the summit. And this has to be respected. Now, what is my position as a Muslim as for the other routes is exactly to say they might be right, wallahu a'lam. God knows best. And I would say that if we want to be serious with our respective religious communities, is not to make things relative, because it's not going to work. It's easier to have a dogmatic mind than to have a mind which is convinced by his or her principles, but suspending the judgment as to the other. And I think that this has to do with pedagogy. But on this, in the classical Islamic traditions, we had debates among scholars, and it's an ongoing debate. And this is why I think it's quite important to start with a discussion on salvation, to be able to talk on this ourselves. But then, and this I hope will be our challenge, you and me and all of us, is how do you reach our respective communities and the people? Because at the end of the day, what we want is let us speak about our respective way of dealing with salvation and respect towards other ways. Now, as to the truth within it, I don't know. Allahu A'lam.
Please join me in thanking.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and have a nice conference over there. Sorry for not being with you.
Thank you.